On Thursday, September 11th, Prime Minister Mark Carney introduced the first five projects of national interest. These are designed to be nation-building projects. And that kind of got me thinking about, well, what does it mean to build a nation? Now, we have some historical precedents for this because shortly after the corporation or the creation of Canada in 1867, Prime Minister John A. Macdonald brought in the national policy. And one of those there were three policies, three projects. And one of them was the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway. And it literally tied the country together from coast to coast. And you could argue that at that time, when we didn't have the internet or even telephones, that really did tie Canada together as a fledgling nation. And then there were some other, there was east-west trade between Western Canada and Eastern Canada, and immigration were the other two parts of the policy. So is Mark Carney's strategy or his vision for pivoting away from the United States and no further integration between the Canadian and American economies, and forging closer ties to Europe in particular with defense agreements and so on, but also Asia, looking for new markets for our products? Is that nation building, and are the projects that supposedly are on this list, the national projects of interest list, are they nation building? Let's look at Carney's definition of nation building. And there's 3 points, and I pulled these from speeches and remarks that he's made. First one, reduce Canada's reliance on the U.S. and make the economy more resilient and self-reliant. Okay, fair enough. We've talked about that. Number two, major transformative industrial and infrastructure projects that connect regions, diversify products, build new markets, create high-paying jobs across sectors. Okay, it's interesting. And projects should align with Indigenous interests in Canada's climate goals. Now, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, I did some economic development work in Saskatchewan with Saskatchewan First Nations and the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations. And we've come a long way from there, folks, believe me. So we've made a lot of progress, and Indigenous communities will be at the table for many of these projects, and they'll be consulted, and they'll have a chance to invest. That's good. Like that. I think that's legitimately, that is kind of a nation-building approach. Canada's climate goals. Well, I mean, this is the Prime Minister that already deep sixed Canada's consumer carbon tax. And even though he has a reputation on the international stage as a climate finance guru, so far, climate's not getting a lot of play in his government, which we don't spend a lot of time on climate here at Energy Media because we see it as the other side of the coin, or clean energy and technology are the other side of the coin of climate. We focus on that. So nevertheless, it's an important issue. Now, I would argue that based on what he's laid out, what he said, and what I've talked about here, that that is not a nation-building strategy, not a nation-building approach to things. And we want to talk about how, in fact, we might even be moving backward in some ways. So in pre-20th century Canada, right, from the very beginning, when European settlers or explorers came to Canada, it was all about shipping raw materials, natural resources, back to the imperial center. So we've been a hinterland to a imperial, at least until the U.S., an imperial power for much of Canada's history, the metropolis. And this is actually codified in a theory, in a school of Canadian history called the Staples thesis. And Harold Adams Innes was the most well-known proponent of it. And this is about 100 years ago, and it shaped a lot of the way we think about Canada's history. We are the natural resource providers to more developed economies. But Jim Stanford, who is a labor economist and lately has been writing some really good stuff in the policy options, just published a few days ago, And that, it kind of opened my eyes. He argues that especially in the 20th century, but particularly after 1945, the end of the Second World War, Canada actually built a very strong manufacturing sector, technology sector, and related value-added sectors like auto, aerospace, and pharmaceuticals. By 2000, the percentage of Canada's goods that were unprocessed or had a low processing was actually only 20%. 80% of the goods that we exported had some higher level of value added to them. And now, nearly half of our exports are now primary or barely processed. And part of this is explained by the huge increase in the export of oil and gas to the United States. Because if you look at the value of the oil and gas that we send to the south, it's literally three times the amount of the sector that's in second place, which is autos. So that would skew the numbers a little bit, but I think, Jim's point is well taken. We send raw logs to China. We send unprocessed grains from Western Canada over to various customers. We appear to be slipping back and have lost some of the value-added processing and manufacturing that we built up in the 20th century. Now, when Trump put on his tariffs and Canada was thinking about what its response should be, we here at Energy Media launched a little campaign. And the idea was just to get our audience thinking about how maybe Canada should approach this. And we came up with Canada 2050, which is essentially how do we re-engineer Canada for a 21st century economy that is less geared to natural resources, export, especially oil and gas, and in fact is electrifying. I mean, this is the key part of what we're going to see this century is we are going to electrification on the demand side, EVs, heat pumps, industrial processes, and on the supply side, wind, solar, batteries, and whatever other clean energy technologies we develop. So the first thing to do is add value to natural resources. That's number one. We've talked to economists like Torsten Jackert from University of British Columbia, and they all say the same thing. The fastest and best way, quickest way to diversify the economy is to add value to what you're already doing. Process it and go as high up the value chain as you can. Stop sending raw materials to be processed somewhere else. The second thing is electrify everything. And this is the process that, electrification is being driven by China. We're behind the eight ball, even though we have a fairly stable electrical grid, have a very clean grid. Nevertheless, on the demands, that's on the supply side. On the demand side, we've done very little to electrify our transportation sector with the electric vehicles, our building sector with heat pumps and so on. So electrify everything, but particularly the processes that extract and process our natural resources. Number three, build, build, build. And this echoes Mark Carney's strategy to support number one and number two. So build what you need to add value and build what you need to electrify. So if that's ports and it's rail and the corridors, whatever it is, but you want to get those value-added resources to the coast so they can go to Asia and Europe, great. And you want to lower their costs, be competitive, electrify. That's our campaign. So how do these projects fit within this context I've just sketched out? Not very well. And I would argue that they really kind of fail the test as nation-building projects. So the first one is LNG Canada's phase two. It will double the size of phase one. And phase one was $40 billion. I mean, that's a lot of capital, create a lot of jobs. And I can see why, and it created a lot of tax revenue, which is why governments love it so much. And so I can see why this was top of the list for yesterday's announcement. Then there's a Darlington new nuclear project, which is a small modular reactor. It'll be one of the first of its kind in the world, first one in North America. I think I'm going to hold my breath. I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for this one. We'll see how it works out. I think the jury's out until we actually see a working reactor that came in on schedule and on budget, because that's been nuclear's weakness for a long time. Quebec Terminal Container Project, that's the Port of Montreal. And this seems, like it could be a nation. Anything that, if you've got infrastructure that allows us to send out manufactured goods over to Europe through the St. Lawrence Seaway, that seems like sensible. I'll take this one as a nation building project. The next two, Saskatchewan copper mine and Northwest BC copper mine expansion. If this is part of the critical mineral strategy and the copper gets processed in Canada, made into battery metals in Canada, goes into battery packs that are made in Canada and wind up in EVs made in Canada, then I think you can argue that this would be nation building. But with the details we have now, at this point, it doesn't. There's no indication that that's going to be the case. So really, what we've got here is three natural resource projects that really we don't know. LNG, you could argue, doesn't add any value at all, just chills and compresses gas so that it can be turned into gas someplace else. The copper mine will be sent out as mineral as ore, or will it be processed? And then nuclear is kind of the same old, same old. And the container, the port, in favor of that one. Okay, so I've got to give Mark Carney a little bit of slack, cut him a little slack here, because he promised speed and scale during the election campaign. He had to deliver something. There's been a lot of talk about major projects. He appointed Don Farrell, the veteran Alberta energy executive, as head of the major projects office. He's got momentum. He had to announce something, and no surprise, it would be projects that were already underway or are shovel ready, approved, have regulatory approval, and can be started right away. I mean, he needed some momentum. So I get it. This is not, maybe these five projects are not illustrative of his larger approach, and we'll see what other projects off the list get announced. But I want to make the point here that this is not, we keep calling it a strategy, and I suppose it is, but it's not strategic. And what I mean by that is to look at the US under Joe Biden and China. China, for example, 15, 20 years ago, decided it wanted to dominate clean energy technology. So wind and solar and batteries and electric vehicles and heat pumps. It put in place a very well-crafted strategy. It supported it with enormous resources on both the supply side and the demand side. This is important because if you build out wind and solar and batteries, so you have lots of electricity, and then on the demand side, you promote electric vehicles, electrification of transportation, really, because it's not just cars and trucks. It's like buses and two and three wheelers and so on, and also heat pumps. So now you're deploying these technologies that you've made while you're using technologies that you made to generate the electricity. Very strategic, and is part of its larger geopolitical strategy to rival the U.S. in terms of economic size and military might. Joe Biden saw what was going on, and it was COVID actually that really kicked it off for the Biden administration, according to some of the speeches I've read. And they said, look, if China's going in this direction, it's going to be the first electro state. We cannot be reliant upon supply chains that are controlled and dominated by our major geopolitical rival. Can't do that. We need to if clean energy and clean energy technologies are the future, we have to build our own industry with our own supply chains, and we'll do it in partnership with those countries with whom we have free trade agreements, like Canada and Mexico. And one of the smartest things they ever did was hire Jigar Shah to head up the loans program at the Department of Energy. He had tens of billions of dollars to loan out. Now, Jigar Shah is not well known in Canada, but he certainly is in the United States. He's kind of a clean energy superstar. Been around for a long time, and he did a bang-up job while he was heading up the loans program by being an evangelist. He didn't just sit back, and this is what Carney has done. Jigar went out and he organized, he evangelized, he helped create hydrogen hubs, he helped bring in battery investment and worked on the supply chains and made money available, on and on and on. And he did a heck of a job. And by the way, bit of a feather in our hat. Jigger has agreed that late September or early October, he's going to come by for an interview. So we're going to have maybe an hour with him, and we'll raise some of these issues about strategy and how it rolled out and his role in it. So I'm very excited about that. This is not the strategic approach that Carney has taken. The change that was initiated by Trump's pressure, with tariff war and with his talk about annexing Canada and turning us into the 51st state. It was a reaction to that. It created the political will to do some things that we probably should have done 10, 20, 30 years ago. But nevertheless, it was not a strategic initiative on our part. It was a reaction to pressure that we were feeling. And so Carney was scrambling. He became the prime minister, in the spring, and then he had an election. And give the guy credit. He had a lot on his plate, and he hasn't got a lot of political experience. So what he's accomplished so far is pretty impressive. But nevertheless, the criticism remains that his campaign, his approach here, lacks a overall overarching strategy, like the Chinese had, like the Joe Biden administration had. And I think that's a fatal flaw, because what it does is it risks us doing what we've always done, which is dig it up and ship it out, rip it and ship it, and in its rawest form, and we'll do the same thing and maybe more of it with different customers. So instead of expanding our markets in the United States, we'll grow markets in Asia, we'll grow markets in Europe, and we'll pat ourselves on the back and think we've done a very good thing. But we still will be stuck in the staples trap, where that's the basis of our economy, and we don't add value to it. So I think that this is not, as it's currently structured, a nation-building strategy, because a nation-building strategy would, like the national policy of John A. Macdonald, would take us forward into the future. It would be future-oriented, and it would say, look, here are the changes that are coming in the global economy, the rise of China, the rise of Asia, the rise of the global south in general. The energy system is changing. It's electrifying. All of that. It's a big task, and there's lots of opportunities, but also lots of risks. How do we re-engineer the Canadian economy so that we remain prosperous as things change and this century progresses? That should be the our overarching strategic focus. And then we can have a critical mineral strategy. We can have a national power grid strategy. We can have a clean energy technology manufacturing strategy. All of those become sort of sub-strategies in this overarching vision. Maybe that's the way we would call it. We need a vision, and then we need strategies, and then we need plans, and then we need policies to implement the plans. So this ain't rocket science, but we're moving at warp speed here, and that's not really Canada's, bread and butter. We're a decentralized federation, and it's like herding cats. Really a lot of cats. So Carney's got his work cut out for him, and we'll see how he goes. But as it stands now, these 5 projects that have been announced are not nation-building projects, and in my opinion, the government still lacks a nation build or a strategy that will build the kind of Canadian economy that will support our Canada going into the 21st century.